Okay, one of the most versatile tools in our shop is a table saw. There's lots of parts to the table saw we need to learn, so let's get started. Number one is the miter gauge. The miter gauge slides in these little grooves on the saw. The miter gauge is for cross-cutting only, very similar to the miter saw. Remember in the miter saw we only cross-cut? Same thing here. We only cross-cut with the miter gauge. On the rip fence, we'll take our jointed edge and we'll put that against the fence. So we have a nice clean edge along the fence. This will be used for ripping. We haven't done this procedure yet in our class, but it's step 5. It's our next step. Step 4 was jointed edge. 1. We put that jointed edge against the fence so we can do step 5, which is rip to width. The width of the wood is across the grain. This is the width from this edge to this edge. We lock that down. We can cut this. The blade will cut all the way down. It'll reduce the width of the wood. We use the rip fence. If we want to reduce the length of the wood, we use the miter gauge. Length reduced. We don't use both together. Very dangerous. Other parts of the saw is the blade guard. Comes up and down. It does stay in the up position. If you push it up all the way, it'll stay. Bring it down just to cover the blade. The other parts are the anti-kickback fingers. They're spring-loaded, similar to the ones on the planer. If the wood is going to be cut like this, if it starts to pull back on you, the kickback fingers catch the wood and don't let it come back. So I'm pushing pretty hard here, and it's not coming back. But it can go forward. So we don't want the wood to come back towards you as you're cutting. On the front of the saw, we have our blade height wheel. If you turn it clockwise, the blade height will raise. Sometimes it's hard to turn until you loosen up this middle section here. It could be tightened up and locked. Loosen that up, lefty-loosey. Clockwise, the blade raises. Counterclockwise, the blade lowers. You'll be doing this over and over again to set the height of the blade for the wood that you're cutting. To turn the saw on, put this paddle and pull it towards you. Saw comes on. To turn it off, push it down. This paddle is in the perfect position for your knee. Turn it on, your knee. So if you get in trouble, use your knee to turn it off. On the side of the saw, this is the tilt wheel. This tilts the blade, and we rarely use this. So you just loosen it up again, and you can tilt the wheel at different angles. We also have our push sticks located on the side of the saw. This is where push sticks live, and we have different styles of push sticks for us. So that was parts of the saw. Next up is general safety. We wait for the blade to come to full speed. It doesn't take very long. I'm pulling the paddle now. And almost immediately, but it does take a while for the blade to coast down. Now this blade is set so that way if you happen to touch it, the blade will go beneath the table within milliseconds so you don't get cut. It's called a saw stop.
The blade has a sensor that detects electrical conductivity. A piece of wood is not very conductive, so the saw goes right through it. A salty wet finger is conductive.
Well, it's a lot like a touch lamp. There's a small electrical signal on there, conducts that signal into my body, and my body absorbs some of the signal, and that triggers the system. Okay. It'll detect that in less than 1,000th of a second.
Okay. Any volunteers?
I trust you.
Hey, over there in the fridge. Yeah, you. Yes.
That's right.
We're going to use a salty, wet, conductive, all-beef Frank.
And so I'll hold it just like it was my thumb.
You gotta be kidding me.
Let's see it. There's nothing.
It is.
That is amazing. That really is. I mean, that's it's like nothing ever happened.
The blade is rotating at about 5,000 RPM. It's forced to stop in 1/1000th of a second. It saves a finger, but mangles the machine.
you know, you have so much momentum in here. You're decelerating something at like 1,000 Gs, you know, 1,000 times the acceleration of gravity.
Now we get warped. Machine stops on a dime, or in this case, a franc. Machine is not happy about this fact.
Any way that this asymmetrically hits the weight, it's just going to put huge torques. You're slowing this thing down at 1,000 Gs. We just have no human reference to what that means. That's like driving a car 1,000 miles an hour and hitting a wall.
Yeah, concrete wall.
And it's just flapping like it's a piece of paper.
5,000 RPMs is a lot of energy. The energy has to go somewhere when it stops, so it's transferred to the saw stop module, which acts like the crumple zone in a car. The module and saw blade are now officially trashed. But hey, at a cost of about $60, better to pay that than with a finger.
It's an amazing idea, and it's implemented in a way where you're using energy for its own stop.
Steve Gass is a true believer in his design, which brings us to our next demonstration. Steve is going to put his own finger into the table saw blade.
How you feeling about this?
Well, a little nervous.
Yes, you knew we had to go for it.
I don't much like doing it, but it is such a unique opportunity. Let's do it.
There's not going to be a take two here. Having everything set right is crucial. As if you need a reminder, this is with saw stop. This is without. Without. That mask Steve is about to put on isn't a protection from spurting blood. It's to protect his eyes from the bright lights needed by our high-speed cameras.
Yeah, you want to try putting your finger in there and just tell us how
But
it
you
feels?
are never going to try this at home, right?
Yep.
Right? Finally, lights, camera, conductivity.
You all right?
Yep.
There's no blood. There's nothing.
Nope. Didn't hurt.
This is a man who has faith in his creation. Now we bet you've never seen this before, a finger being shoved into a table saw. At least, we hope you aren't one of those unlucky 10. We know the machine stopped, and we know nobody got hurt. But we gotta say it. Ouch!
It felt a little like a buzz or a tickle almost.
You're talking about your finger in a table saw, and you're talking about a buzz and a tickle.
We've done a lot of bizarre things in our lab, but somehow this demonstration of a man's faith in technology is one of the coolest.
That was an unbelievable thing to do, and you've proven your point.
1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005. Takes about 5 seconds, so that 5 seconds is critical that we don't get anywhere near the blade even when it's coasting down, because it'll still set the saw stop off and ruin the saw blade. Keep fingers 6 inches away from the blade. Conveniently, this groove on both sides of the blade is 6 inches away. So just keep your fingers that far away and out, so they can be this close and further, but no closer. Never freehand with the saw. Maybe we're trying to cut an angle, or we're trying to cut like this. This is very dangerous. We're either going to use the rip fence to cut with the grain, or we're going to use the miter gauge to cut across the grain. And you're going to hear me say this over and over again. You're going to either use either or, but not both. You can't use both. If you try to use both, let's say I'm trying to do this, I'm trying to cut, my hands are going to be 6 inches away here and pushing the wood through. As soon as this piece of wood's cut all the way through, there's nothing holding that piece of wood. And since we have a turning blade turning towards you, it's going to catch that piece of wood and do something called kickback. It'll kick back at you. So we never use the rip fence and the miter gauge together. This is a big no-no. Safety apparel, don't forget your jewelry and your glasses. For demonstration purposes, I am going to have the guard up, but normally we would have the guard down. But I want you to see what I'm doing here, so I'm going to have the guard up for demonstration purposes only, but this is always going to be down as much as we can. I'm going to go ahead and cut a piece of wood off this. I'm going to cross cut with the miter gauge. I'm going to cut a small piece of wood because that's our next spot, is never use your fingers to remove scrap wood around the blade. Now this piece of wood will not kick back because there's nothing holding it against the blade. It's just going to sit there and float. But we don't use our fingers now to remove from around the blade. This blade is still pretty sharp, and so if you try to grab in there while it's coasting down, we're going to set the blade protection system off and it'll ruin the blade. So again, use a piece of wood, a pencil, just something, and pull that out. I'll have push sticks around. You can use a push stick. Just don't use your fingers. Do you remember on the joiner we stood on the left side of the saw? The same thing here. If we're ever going to have kickback, it's going to happen on the right side of the blade, over here, where the rip fence is. This is where kickback's going to happen. So we're going to stand on the left side of the blade here and just kind of angle ourselves. Even when we rip, I'm going to stand a little bit off side here from the blade. The blade's coming right down here. I'm just a little bit left of the blade. Don't overreach after you finish cutting. So after you're done cutting, you're pushing the wood through. We'll use push sticks if it's this narrow. Push the wood through. Don't try to overreach over the saw to grab your piece of wood. That's dangerous. Just push it through, then come around and grab the piece of wood. The teeth of the saw are pointed toward the operator. It's probably a possible test question. So these teeth are all pointing towards you. They're cutting towards you because we're going to be putting opposite pressure into the blade. We're going to use a push stick whenever we're ripping less than 6 inches. So kind of like the joiner, anything less than 4 inches we use the push stick. On the table saw, anything less than 6 inches. A jointed edge is always needed against the fence. So don't forget, that's why we did our jointed edge, and we need that to be against the fence. Here's a piece of wood with a nice jointed edge. It's super close, everything's super smooth for us, no gaps, no issues. Now let's take a look at a piece with edge of the wood. We haven't jointed this other edge. And so when we join an edge, we only joint one edge. Notice my mark again that I have for us. Let's turn it around. We got gaps up there. We have issues. So we're not going to get a clean cut. Plus, sometimes that wood could be bowed and then move in there. When it's moving in there, the blade could catch it. Once the blade catches it, we have kickback. This is why we need a smooth edge.